Sahana Vavatu Sahano Punaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astuma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy and vigor. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cover with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. There's a story that comes through. It comes originally from the Jataka tales and other things about the hare who was under threat from hounds and contacted all the friends that the hare could find. But each one of the animals in turn had an excuse and couldn't help. And the moral of the story was that there is a danger in having lots of friends. But having friends and the quality of friendship and friendliness, these are different things. Tonight I wanted to talk to you about the benefits of friendliness. And that may seem quite an obvious subject. It seems that we should be friendly to everybody, but in reality, we don't find this attitude of friendship to all. Some internal component allows us to be critical, and so, first of all, we like people to agree with us. People who are agreeable are people who are our friends. People who fight with us, we put them as our enemies in that category. Bhagavad Gita has a different view of what is a friend and what is an enemy. It tells us that we ourselves are our own best friend or our own worst enemy. We can raise our mind up or lower ourselves as we want, but what is it that raises or lowers the mind? So the idea of cultivating what is called Maitri or friendliness, as well as Karuna, compassion and other qualities, is really contained in Patanjali Yoga Sutras as an initial step toward concentration. First, we have to understand what we mean by sutras and the sutra literature. Patanjali Sutras is the principal text for the yoga philosophy, which is intrinsically a dualistic philosophy and barely theistic. It contains reference to Ishvara, but it's not the extra cosmic created God that is there in religion, nor is it the intimate deity. This is not expressed, certainly, in the yoga philosophy. And the yoga philosophy and the Sankhya philosophy go together as twins, and the Sankhya philosophy is definitely atheistic. No necessity for a God. Nature can explain everything. Now, all schools of thought agree with the Sankhyas in as far as their analysis of nature is concerned, and in their analysis of the psychology that is necessary in order for us to live a useful, stable, peaceful, stress-free life. Everybody wants it. If you do a Google search on a subject of, stress release or relief of tension or psychological peace of mind or any of these things, you'll find enormous numbers of search. People are looking for these things. And why is that? We can't blame the environment and say we live in a fast-paced world, and for that reason, we have to take special measures. Because it is not the other person that is your friend or your enemy or is the problem. You can't blame an understanding or misunderstanding that you were born under an unlucky star. You can't really start off a meaningful sentence by saying, if only this, if only that. I would be okay, but these are words which escape the real culprit for your misery, and that is you yourself. You have only yourself to blame. And there's a causal structure contained inherently in nature which says when we trace things back as a human, your wrong thinking is there. You may say you came through with certain tendencies, but those tendencies themselves were as a result of habitual thinking. It is our thinking and our thought that we have to control. And so, Patanjali Yoga Sutras, carrying on from the Sankhya scheme of things, gives us a wonderful psychology. And don't expect full explanations, because it's sutra literature, which means it's just a bare thread, a bare minimum, an aphorism. Aphorisms were used for ease of learning, wonderful memory technique. Supposing you take notes on this evening's talk. You won't take down everything I'm saying. You might make a few notes here and there. You might make bullet points. But from the tight bullet points that you make, you can certainly elaborate when you're reviewing it in your own mind or discussing it with others. So the whole thing doesn't have to be told. Only a few words here and there, and from that, the memory flows out, and you're able to recall everything we discussed on the subject. And this is why the aphoristic technique is being used. A short word, a short phrase that triggers your memory and allows you to recall all the ins and outs, all the detailed conversations we had, and how we came to certain conclusions. So the problem from the yogic point of view is the mind. But what is the mind? Well, there's a technical term called chitta. It means a mind stuff. We can view it something like a body of water or a lake. And within the lake, we cannot observe the bottom. We can't observe it because of lack of clarity. The mind is like that. From the vast source or resource of matter within the universe, a subtle portion arrived locally, and we call this chitta, mind stuff. And this is like, as I say, a lake in constant disturbance. What is disturbing it? What is disturbing it is primarily a misunderstanding of the world, a misinterpretation of what we find in front, and then a reaction. So this chitta has got 5 types of waves within it. First of all, a wave that denotes right knowledge. What is right knowledge? Right knowledge is when we stand aside a little bit and evaluate something properly for what it is, using direct perception, using inference, using some credible authority, that is credible testimony. And all of these techniques of logic are contained in the Nyaya philosophy. And many will use other things as well. So we have to approach the truth with an element of scientific mindedness. We can't just accept something to be true, but the absolute certainty of what is right knowledge is through this direct perception. We see it directly. And then there is ignorance. What is ignorance? Is taking the world at face value and not going through this discriminatory process. And so we take the world as something that is real, something that is permanent, something that we should invest in. And this is full of fears. It's full of turmoil and doubts. It has some joys in it, no doubt. It has some pleasures in it, no doubt. It has some highlights, no doubt. But I'm not being overly pessimistic when I say, if you review your life, largely we are escaping all the negative things. And these negative things really have a telling effect and go into a recorded area called the subconscious mind. And repetition of it becomes a habit. And the habit is really based and centered around another aspect which involves a sense of I. We take this body and the mind, we combine it as a body-mind complex with functions of acting and making a profit, and with its inference of pleasure and power, and construct a strategy around it in such a way that we feel that we are safe, and yet the formula is not working because we haven't found the fulfillment that we so desperately seek. And that comes psychologically as disturbance in the mind. So many waves going on in the mind. So imagine this mind to be something like a lake with many disturbances, many waves, and a lot of mud churned up, no clarity, no purity. And so we cannot see what is at the bottom. What is at the bottom is our fundamental self that we have the capacity to observe or to tune into in a direct way through direct perception. And it is this constant effort at tuning into the mind, or tuning the mind into this, tuning the attention into the glory of the eternal self that sits beyond and behind it, and aloof from it, as it were, and yet connected by its presence. This we call Purusha. So there are two ways of looking at it. We can look at the external world as an expression of this divinity, and we can look at the internal aspect of it. How to see this internal aspect, what Jesus calls the kingdom of heaven within. Jesus himself gives the clue. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And what we call this eternal self, in theological language, theistic language, religious language, we call it God. Not something in the sky, but something intrinsically deep within us. After all, if the kingdom of heaven is within us, the king himself is there. You can't have a kingdom divorced from the king. The king is sitting there reigning, and by its presence, by his presence, radiating glory everywhere from there. How to get such a vision, and what is the implication and benefit of it? Benefit of it is it gives us a pain-free existence on the one side, joy and unending bliss on the other. Exactly what we're looking for. Our unconscious mind fights against it because we have to change a habit. And how do we change a habit? We have to promote some superb qualities and saturate the mind with them. And the Patanjali Yoga Sutras is a treatise on dhyana yoga, that is, the system, the approach of meditation. The end of this month, we are having a workshop on this meditation, 2 days. How to deal with a subject that many people find obscure and difficult. Many people say, oh, I meditate. When you investigate it, it's really not actually meditation. It's just keeping the mind nice and peaceful and calm. That's all right. That has its own benefit. But what we mean by meditation is to access this eternal subject within us, so that the external world that we view, called objects, and the internal world of subject become one and the same. There's a unity of existence. What is the effect? The effect is that this lake that is called the psyche, the mind, becomes absolutely calm and no wave disturbs our vision. Now, waves have a characteristic of interference. That is, if you put two waves out, they'll combine, they'll contact each other, and at a certain point, they'll cancel each other out and provide for us what we call interference patterns. It's another way of saying we can neutralize a wave by introducing a third wave. So these waves come in 3 varieties. But let's just continue the other vrittis or waves within the mind. We've covered right knowledge, we've covered ignorance, a misunderstanding of the world, and then there is verbal delusion. I'll come back to that. And then there is sleep and there is memory. Memory in the waking state is called memory. Memory in a sleep state is called dream. So we can see that these 5 aspects or these 5 varieties of waves actually correspond to the waking neurological system of brain waves that we can measure. We can easily register the physiological counterpart to what we are discussing. Let us come to verbal delusion. What happens in a wave is a bit like, or in a pond, or an ocean, or a lake, is something like stones being thrown in. Neurologists now are using this kind of thinking, and they're saying, in answer to the question, what is consciousness? And they're thinking of neural networks. They're thinking only of the brain. They say you can't locate this consciousness anywhere, but it's something like a lake, and two stones are thrown in. One stone, depending on its heaviness, depending on its velocity, will create ripples and waves, and one such stone, if you make that analogy, is coming from a reaction within, and one is coming from outside. It's a very, very accurate way of describing this yogic understanding of how we think, how we react, and verbal delusion is one of these things that we have to master. What does it mean? We come across something, either what somebody says or some event, and immediately there's a reaction that is not well thought out. So the verbal delusion is really an internal movement. Now, previously I have told you of the 4 R's. First of all is a reaction, and the reaction is habitual. There's not much we can do about it. It may be wise, it may be foolish, regardless of it. Generally it's foolish. We leave it as it is because psychologically to repress anything is a very bad technique. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. It comes back with a vengeance. So leave it where it is. It's an old friend from our subconscious mind, our childhood, maybe even our previous life, or samskaras as they called. So let it come and let it go. These old friends might have been useful in childhood, but in adulthood, they become your enemy. Come if you want, stay if you can, have a cup of tea, go if you must. But in the next moment is an opportunity because it's a blank. You can put something you want, something you can choose. You can review what went on in the reaction, and then you can put a revaluation in. And the revaluation will be of a higher order, containing noble thoughts, noble values, noble feelings. You can put it in sufficiently in number to counteract what went before and play a game like that. What is meditation? It's a game of guiding thought like that. That means we have to have a sporting attitude about it. So that before we think what are the disturbances in concentration, we have to then think what are the counter movements that have to be cultivated and made into a habit. There are a number of evidences where the mind is not in a state of concentration. These are put in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras as various obstacles. We can't concentrate really unless we are able to direct the mind in a certain way toward real knowledge, true knowledge. What is called concentration, when sustained, called meditation, that is called right knowledge. And it's followed by reasoning. It has to be rational. Very often when the mind is in a disturbed condition, it is because some emotional reaction took place. Before we can stop it, it's there. All right, let it come, let it go. But let us calm the mind through a little bit of reasoning. What we call proverbially, stepping back and counting to 10. Walking away for a while, calming everything down, calming the breath down, maybe doing some breathing exercises, calming the neurological system down, and then putting things in their real context. So it's followed by reasoning and then discrimination. Ultimately, the discrimination is like this. If I think that this world in front of me is solid and real and not fleeting, not changing, if I think that it is not something that is there and steady, if I think that it is something that comes and goes in an instant and comes and goes within the framework of time as a kind of river flowing in front of me, and space, which is dependent on form, dependent on all my senses, if I can go beyond that and see something different, then this is called discrimination. If I can see the deeper aspect of what is there and reach its fundamental unity of existence, this is called discrimination. And this is immediately followed by bliss, an internal rapture. So all of these things are there in what is called concentration. If we don't have this kind of concentration, says the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, a number of things are there with us. First of all, to make sure that our concentration is not disturbed, the body has to have a measure of health. You know yourself that disease within yourself or another will be a great distraction. Those people who got the COVID, for example, these people will experience lethargy. And those people who experience lethargy, lack of energy, some maybe labored breathing, whatever it is, these people will report, I couldn't really meditate properly during this time. And then, of course, there's a habitual mental laziness. This is also an obstacle to concentration. Doubt is a terrible obstacle. And these are all very often, apart from the disease, these are all personality-based. Or they're based on the human condition that says, let me have an easy life, or let me not be enthusiastic today, let me be enthusiastic in 5 years' time. And clinging to sense enjoyments, giving us a formula which doesn't really work because it has to be repeated. A kind of compensation for all the painful moments that we experience emotionally or even physically. False perception, non-attaining concentration, falling away from the state. Don't think that you're a yogi who's been practicing for 30 years and everything is fine. We don't have to practice anymore. No. You like a football, you kick it up in the air, it has to come down, you have to keep it going. There's no holiday for it. You have to keep polishing a vessel, otherwise it'll get tarnished. In this same way, you have to keep the mind clean until the habitual part of it requires nothing more. It is then perpetually shining and clean. And when these disturbances in concentration occur, then the symptoms are there. Like any disease, the symptom will be there. Grief will be there. Disappointment will be there. Unhappiness will be there. Mental distress will be there. Even a physical tremor of the body, a sense of being out of balance will be there. Anybody who has studied kinesiology will know that with various, what the yogis call nadis, as a network throughout the human body, they can be easily upset by a stressful condition, a wrong thought, a negative event, a shock, a disappointment. And then, of course, irregular breathing. These all accompany lack of concentration. So what is the remedy that Patanjali puts out? And what are the benefits? Well, I can tell you straight away, the benefit is concentration. And what is the benefit of concentration? Is clarity of vision that culminates in bliss. And the closer we get to the underlying truth, the more blissful we become. And so, what is the start? We have to cultivate some habits. These are counter habits to what we already have. Let's take the first one. Maitri. This is the one I have emphasized this evening. Friendliness. Karuna, compassion, mercy. Mudita, gladness. Upeksha, indifference to those good or bad. Sukha, happiness. Dukkha, misery. Indifference to these two things. Punya and apunya, indifference to virtue or vice. Vishayanam, regarding the subjects towards the objects or subjects respectively. Bhavanatha, by cultivating these habits, by constant thinking and practice, then what happens? The chitta, that is the mind, prasadanam, becomes purified and therefore stress-free. Now, how do we cultivate friendliness? When we are selective. We can't be friendly to all. Most people find that that's their position. But this says you have to cultivate that, but not in a false way. So on the other side of friendliness, we have to take a non-judgmental attitude. People we see for the first time, we're very friendly toward them. Over the last maybe several months, I had the opportunity to do a little bit of climbing up some hills here and there. I was in the south of Ireland in Cork and Bantry and climbing a mountain there, 2.5 kilometers, and climbing down. I was wearing my dhoti, and a young girl, probably maybe 4 or 5, in her innocence said, "Oh, I love your skirt." And I laughed at the innocence of the child. And I said, "Thank you very much." It's not exactly a skirt, but never mind. You see how the child felt? She could easily be friendly. And why aren't we friendly? Because we are judgmental or reserved or shy. And the poor English, of course, get the brunt of this criticism. There's a story about 2 Englishmen that got stuck on a desert island. And the island was only 100 meter long by 50 meter wide. And they were both rescued. And they said, "Oh, at least there were 2 of you. At least you were mutual companions to each other." And they said, no, we never spoke. We hadn't been introduced. So you see how we keep our ego intact. The only reason why we're not friendly to all is because we think that we are special, important, we are somebody with a personality that we wish to retain, our sense of individuality. And this ego is a big obstacle. It's one of the kleshas or obstacles. Ignorance, the sense of aham, the sense of I, and then this move toward pleasure, pain, syndrome, and attachment, and finally clinging to life. These are the various obstacles in a nutshell that Patanjali puts out to us. He puts this very comprehensively. And when we study this Patanjali Yoga Sutras, it's useful to study them in the form of Raja Yoga, Vivekananda's commentary on it, in 2 parts. One is comprehensive summary commentary, and the other is Patanjali Sutras themselves, with his commentaries derived from the various classical commentators on these sutras, such as Vyasa and Vachaspati, with Vachaspati's gloss and so on. All right. So there are some things we have to cultivate before we even think that we are able to concentrate. Friendship. Having an attitude which gives the benefit of the doubt to the other, but more importantly, have a penetrating vision to see this divine behind everything. What makes the eyes shine if it's not that? What makes speech possible? If not that, one without a second that sits behind it. If not for the spirit. It is not that we are body with a spirit. It is that we are spirit with a body. And every entity that we encounter, we should surely see the self in all and all beings in the self. Or to put it in religious language, see the God in everyone. And to put it even more intimately, feel the connection, feel the God in everyone. And then all your behavior will be as a spontaneous reaction to it. Won't have to be thought out. There'll be immediately compassion. That's the next quality that is compassion, karuna, compassion, mercy. It is easy for us to be compassionate to those within our inner domestic circle. It is easy to be compassionate to those we know. But this genetic love is nothing special, even animals have it. To have a compassion for who? To have a friendliness toward toward everybody, and mercy for those who are suffering. Most people are suffering. And gladness, that is mudita, gladness for those who are successful. Mainly when somebody is successful, we reference it to ourselves and say, oh, I'm not successful, that person is successful, jealousy can arise, and we wish that person the greatest ill. Thinking that, I wish I could have done that, I wish I had said that. So, absence of jealousy. Compassion, of course, because naturally the human heart is designed to be moved with the generosity of spirit because our nature is pure love. And when we see the other person suffering, this is the highest expression of a civilized entity, of the great, great evolutionary movement that has resulted in this wonderful, wonderful, almost designed, manifested entity that comes out as a human being. The capacity to do good, not just a duty toward good, but to do it with a sense of self-abnegation, a true generosity of spirit. So compassion for those who are suffering, and indifference being thought of in regard to subjects, whether they're happy, unhappy, good and evil, respectively. We're not judgmental. Another way of putting this is to cultivate a feeling of thankfulness and an absence of all criticism. There is no such thing as constructive criticism. Instead, there is compassionately taking a person, coaching for improvement may be a better term, helping somebody usefully on the way with a non-judgmental attitude. What right do we have to judge? Jesus puts it in a beautifully comic way. Why don't you take out, instead of taking the splinter out of your neighbor's eye, why don't you take the beam, the whole tree from your own? Think of yourself first. Think of your own condition. Correct yourself first. What right do you have to criticize another? What right do you have to think that your job is one of correcting? If you take the attitude of a corrector, a professional corrector, there'll be no end of opportunities supplied by the divine to correct. And at the end of the day, you make a complaint, Lord, I never had any peace of mind. I couldn't do any spiritual practice. And the reply would be, but you asked for an endless supply of things to correct. You became something like a mechanic in a shed, fixing things endlessly. Sometimes people who have that attitude, you ask them, you are so useful, you make a correction of everything. What did poor God do before you came, before you were born? He must have been hopeless. He couldn't do anything himself. You had to do everything for him because he's been there from ancient days, from Genesis, has a long beard and white hair, And by now, after all this 13.8 billion years, is now a little senile. We have to do everything for him. This you whisper. We have to do everything for the poor fellow. See? So that kind of attitude is only pure egoism, and egoism is the greatest obstacle. When we give a course, Enneagram, the Essence of Truth, it's with this in mind. Understand that egos are not standard, they're individual, compiled and molded by your previous experience. So cultivating all these habits. Now, what do we mean by a habit? Let us read Swami Vivekananda's commentary. He said, we must have these four sorts of ideas. We must have friendship for all. We must be merciful towards those that are in misery. And when people are happy, we ought to be happy. And to the wicked, we must be indifferent. So with all subjects that come before us, if the subject is a good one, we shall feel friendly towards it. If the subject of thought is one that is miserable, we must be merciful toward it. Not just people, but things that arrive in the mind as well. If it is good, we must be glad. If it is evil, we must be indifferent. Shrug it off. Don't labor the mind with an extra burden of guilt. These attitudes of the mind towards the different subjects that come before it will make the mind peaceful. When we do meditation course, I often ask people, you know this already, why do you want to do this? They say to get peace of mind. You're on the wrong workshop. Please go and get peace of mind first. Then you can usefully meditate. Most of our difficulties in our daily lives come from being unable to hold our minds in this way. For instance, if a man does evil to us, instantly we want to react. We want to react evil. And every reaction of evil shows that we are not able to hold this mind or this mindset, this chitta down. It comes out in waves towards the object, and we lose our power. Every action in the form of hatred or evil is so much loss to the mind, and every evil thought or deed of hatred or any thought of reaction, if it is controlled, will be laid in our favor. This is the benefit of friendliness and the other qualities. It is not that we lose by thus restraining ourselves. We are gaining infinitely more than we suspect. Each time we suppress hatred or a feeling of anger, it is so much good energy stored up in our favor. That piece of energy will be converted into the higher powers. But I thought you said, Swamiji, that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. We should never suppress anything. And yet the language is like this. So each time we suppress hatred, that means each time we neutralize it with love. We insert love that has a neutralizing effect. This is the technique that Patanjali recommends. These three evolutionary forces that make up the entire universe and make up the mind and the mind stuff itself is what we call gunas, things which bind. These are called sattva, rajas, and tamas. You must be familiar with them. Understanding these gunas is crucial to understanding not only yoga philosophy, but the Vedanta philosophy, which is also built on these Sankhya structures. So in the mind, we find the mind at one point lazy, or darkness, fearful, doubtful. Maybe we are overwhelmed with temptation. It's a dark place. That means far removed from the truth. We are steeped in ignorance. And tamas means darkness. And darkness symbolizes the state of dullness, this morbid state. We can elevate this state of mind to a more active state. What do you call rajas? Rajas's characteristic is primarily self-interest, selfishness. But still, it is an active state. We're at least doing something. And then we have to elevate the mind to sattva. That is, where there's no sense of selfishness, no sense of self-interest, no sense of an active profit complex. There's no I in it. It is pure. It is illumined. It is full of revelation. It has the capacity to reveal something to us. Now, if we take the Vedantic example that we've given so many times previously, of how this world arises and how this mistake arises. And the example is that of a snake and a rope, where we mistake the rope for a snake because the rope was never revealed to us and the rope was hidden from us and the snake was projected by us. This is the state that we find ourselves. This is why we are in a state of ignorance. So what is the way out? With a sporting attitude, we promote the revealing side of things. And in this way, we neutralize the other waves, creating a clarity of mind where we can see through the purity of mind. And we see then the state of glory which is there underlying it, the glory of the self. And then remaining tuned into that. What is spiritual life? Allowing the mind to stay tuned to the glory of the self. That's all. And that requires practice. So Patanjali Yoga Sutras tells us two things are there. Practice and detachment. What does all this mean? Well, Patanjali himself gives us some definitions of this. Practice means this continuously tuning the mind into the glory of the self. Continuously inserting the higher values. Continuously being watchful to see what state the mind is at any given moment in time. And then asserting or converting all that energy to something more useful. Transforming it into something that is golden, transforming demons into diamonds, and making sure that the human mind is saturated with this diamond wealth that has the capacity to reflect the truth. Continuously doing it is called practice. What about detachment? Detachment is simply the reverse. It's simply, in Ramakrishna's language, the more you move toward the east, the further you get away from the west. When you no longer find that there is any joy in the human pleasures in the waking life, when you feel that the sense of taste is in no way compared to the taste of inner bliss, when you register that all sights are forms of God, when you hear every sound as the divine voice, then all these other things that you previously valued become very petty, become trivial. St. Paul says, when I was a child, I played as a child. See, my childish ways were there. But when I became an adult, you see, these were no longer joys to me. So we have to grow in spiritual maturity to the extent that all the things we previously valued as worthwhile pursuits that ended in misery or ended in destruction or simply ended are to be revalued. And there we see the deeper dimension of these things and we see the great glory which is there. So this formula is a formula for daily living, something that is practical. Don't judge anybody. Have an even-mindedness in terms of subjects which are happy or unhappy, or traditionally judged as good or evil. Good and evil always will be there, but let us stay away from any judgment about it. because that itself drags the mind down. It gives us a false sense of criticism. And criticism about the other, the capacity, or the urge, I should say, to change something, to repair something. There's a great example that Ramakrishna gives. There was a priest, and in his house, while telling his beads and trying to meditate, in the opposite house across the road was the house of a prostitute. Every day he went, he wagged his finger at the prostitute. Shame on you to use your body in this way. And she took this on board and she felt very sorry, very guilty. And in private moments she wept. I know. But still her habit was to take people in and earn some money. From her point of view, she felt there was no other way, but she felt so much guilt and sorrow. Now, on the part of the priest, he determined, all right, she's not listening to me. Every visitor who comes there, I'll put a pebble in front and count out. And at the end of the week, he had something like 35 pebbles. And he kept a count. Now it so happened the angel of death on one day came and took both the prostitute and the priest. And the priest went to the nether regions of hell, and the prostitute went to the embrace of the divine. And the priest complained. Oi, he said, I think there's been a mistake. I think you got the positions wrong. And then it was explained. No. Every day she thought with misgivings about her activities and resolved to do better. And her love of God increased. But your mind was occupied by counting her sins. And because your mind was occupied with sins, you have your reward. So you can see it is the state of the mind, that's all. So not to criticize anybody, to have compassion for all and be friendly to all. A smile is a transforming entity. You find that very soon, when you smile at people, they will smile back at you, depending on how you smile, of course. If you smile in a sinister way, then people will run away, or they may wonder what you've been up to, whatever it is. But smile comes from inside. The inner smile is what's smiling, and that gets reflected on the outside, in the face. So you smile with a warmness that comes from the recognition of the divinity within. This is the great benefit of friendliness, and why we should cultivate this great quality. Maitri, Karuna, Mudita, Upeksha, Sukha, Dukkha, Punya, Apunya, Vishayanam, and then Chitta Prasadanam, for purification by cultivating these habits. Now we are suffering really from habits, bad habits, mainly orientated toward our sense experience. And the only antidote for habituation is to create a new habit. So let us now create new habits as a way of steadying the mind. Before even we settle down, it is a prerequisite for concentration and therefore for meditation and clearing away the debris that we find in the unconscious area of the mind. Unconscious thinking, the unconscious deposits, is what is the drawing factor. It is the unconscious mind that draws things toward itself. Thought is a suction. Be careful what you are sucking toward yourself. You cannot blame another entity. You cannot blame what you yourself ordered and is delivered now. So let us make new, fresh orders, something that elevates the mind and keeps it in a continuous state of joy and generosity, compassion and friendliness and non-judgmental attitudes. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.